When you ask someone to name a legendary monster from ancient Greek mythology, Medusa is almost always at the top of the list. We picture a terrifying creature with slithering snakes for hair, razor-sharp tusks, and a gaze so lethal it turns any living soul into solid stone. Yet behind this iconic image lies a story far richer, more tragic, and fundamentally misunderstood than popular monster-slaying tropes suggest. In fact, the very name Medusa comes from an ancient Greek verb meaning guardian, ruler, or protector. Before she was turned into a villain in pop culture or a trophy in a hero's quest, Medusa was a symbol of divine protection, a figure of profound sorrow, and an essential key to understanding how ancient myths grew and transformed over thousands of years. To discover the real history of Medusa, we have to travel back to the earliest written records of Greek myth, beginning around the 7th century BCE with the epic poet Hesiod. In his poem, the Theogony, Hesiod set out to map the origins of the gods, the universe, and the monstrous forces dwelling at the edges of the known world. Hesiod tells us that Medusa was one of 3 Gorgon sisters born to the primordial sea deities Phorcys and Ceto, ancient sea creatures who spawned a vast array of monsters. The Gorgons lived far across the ocean at the western frontier of the ancient Greek world, near the realm of night and the edge of the setting sun. 2 of the sisters, Steno and Euryale, were immortal, never aging and never dying. But their 3rd sister, Medusa, was uniquely mortal, bound to a human fate from the moment of her creation. Long before Hesiod composed his verses, the idea of the Gorgon had already haunted the Greek imagination. Gorgon heads appeared in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey as terrifying phantom faces in the underworld, or as horrifying symbols blazoned on the shields of warriors to strike terror into their enemies. But the earliest surviving full-body depiction of Medusa comes not from a text, but from stone. High on a green hillside on the Greek island of Corfu, local farmers digging near a monastery in 1911 unearthed the remains of a monumental sanctuary built 2,600 years ago, the Temple of Artemis. When archaeologists excavated the site, they uncovered a massive carved stone pediment that once stood above the western entrance to the temple. At the very center of this grand architecture was not the goddess Artemis, but Medusa herself. Carved in the archaic style around 580 BCE, the Corfu Medusa is a force of raw, primordial power. She is depicted with broad, muscular limbs, prominent biceps, and legs arranged in a dynamic pinwheeling pose that signifies high-speed flight or running. Ringlets of hair frame her face alongside small, curled serpents, while a belt of heavy, knotted snakes wraps around her waist. She has a wide, open mouth with a protruding tongue, a classic feature associated with terrifying, thunderous noise. Yet this Medusa was not carved to frighten the worshippers entering the sanctuary. Standing alongside 2 giant spotted leopard panthers, she served as a formidable guardian. To the ancient people of Corfu, Medusa was an apotropaic figure, a sacred protector whose formidable presence kept evil away from the holy grounds of Artemis, the goddess of wild nature. Remarkably, the Corfu pediment also captures another crucial element of Medusa's myth, her offspring. Flanking her intact body are her 2 children, Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysoron, the golden giant. In standard mythological traditions, these 2 figures were born from Medusa's severed neck at the exact moment of her death. But on the Corfu sculpture, created long before those canonical stories fully solidified, she is shown intact alongside her children, emphasizing her role as a maternal figure and a potent force of creation, rather than merely a victim of decapitation. As centuries passed and Greek society evolved, so too did the story of Medusa. The most famous and haunting turn in her myth came much later, popularized by writers such as the Roman poet Ovid in his Metamorphoses. In Ovid's account, Medusa was originally not a monster at all, but a mortal woman of breathtaking beauty, celebrated especially for her long, flowing hair. Her beauty attracted the attention of Poseidon, the mighty god of the sea. Poseidon pursued her and ultimately violated her inside the sacred temple of Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war. Instead of punishing Poseidon for desecrating her sanctuary, Athena turned her wrath upon Medusa. Athena transformed Medusa's prized hair into a terrifying nest of writhing, venomous snakes and cursed her with a gaze that would turn any mortal who looked upon her into cold, lifeless stone. Medusa was cast out to live in isolation, becoming mythology's first monstered survivor. Cursed, isolated, and feared by all, Medusa lived at the edge of the world until she became the target of a young warrior named Perseus. Sent on a seemingly impossible quest by a hostile king who wanted him dead, Perseus set out to retrieve the Gorgon's head. Realizing he could not defeat her through strength alone, Perseus relied on divine assistance. Hermes gave him winged sandals to cross vast distances at the speed of thought. Hades provided a helmet of darkness to render him invisible, and Athena granted him a polished bronze shield. Arriving at the dark cave where Medusa slept beside her immortal sisters, Perseus approached without making direct eye contact. Watching only her reflection in his mirror-like shield, he struck with a curved sickle, severing her head while she lay asleep. Far from being a simple tale of triumph, ancient sources reveal deep tragedy in the aftermath of her death. Upon hearing Medusa's death cry, her immortal sisters wailed with such agonizing sorrow that, according to the poet Pindar, Athena was moved to create the aulos, the double-reed flute, specifically to replicate the mournful, high-pitched lamentation of the Gorgons. Drops of blood spilling from her neck onto the North African sands were said to have transformed into every poisonous serpent slithering across Libya. Her blood also possessed dual powers of divine proportions. Blood taken from the left side of her body was a fatal, incurable poison, while blood from her right side held the miraculous ability to restore life to the dead. Ironically, Medusa never harmed or petrified a single person while she was alive, yet after her death, her severed head was endlessly weaponized by Perseus. He used it to turn the sea monster Cetus into stone, petrified an entire island of hostile foes, and transformed Atlas into a massive mountain range. Eventually, Perseus handed the head to Athena, who affixed it to her aegis breastplate, harnessing Medusa's protective, terrifically potent gaze for divine warfare. Across antiquity, the artistic depiction of Medusa underwent a startling shift. Where archaic artists drew her with bulging eyes, sharp tusks, and grotesque features, 5th century BCE classical artists began portraying her as a tragic, human figure. In Attic vase paintings, she is shown asleep, vulnerable, and deeply human, caught in a quiet moment right before her execution. By the time of the Renaissance, artists like Cellini and Caravaggio returned to the theme of decapitation, framing her as a symbol of conquered danger. Yet in recent decades, historians, artists, and scholars have reclaimed Medusa's ancient roots. Sculptors like Luciano Garbati have inverted the myth, depicting Medusa holding the sword and the head of Perseus, framing her not as a passive victim or a mindless monster, but as a symbol of justice, strength, and self-defense. From the monumental stone temple on Corfu to modern literature and feminist iconography, Medusa has never truly left us. She remains a complex figure who bridges the wild and the divine, the terrifying and the protective, the monster and the victim. When we strip away the Hollywood tropes and look beneath the surface of Greek mythology, we find that Medusa was never just a beast to be slain. She was an extraordinary woman with a tragic fate, whose terrifying power was designed not to destroy, but to protect, a true guardian standing watch at the edge of the human world.